Good afternoon, everyone. We are here with Maddie Holder, editor from Bloomsbury Academic, and WHA Vice President Trevor Getz for our final workshop, which is related to the inaugural Diversity in History First Monograph Prize. If any of you are planning on submitting, that prize is due on September 1st. And for the rest of you who are here for really great information from a fabulous editor, we're so happy that you are here too. And I am going to hand it off to Maddie.
Hi, everyone. So I will just share my screen so that I can show you my example proposal that I've put together. But first of all, as Carrie said, my name is Maddie and I'm the Senior Commissioning Editor for World History at Bloomsbury. And in this workshop, I'm going to talk you through how to write a good monograph proposal and also how best to sort of convert your PhD thesis into a book project. So the idea is once you're equipped with sort of my tips and suggestions, we'd love you to invite you to submit your proposal to the Diversity in World History First Monograph Prize, which, as Carrie said, is a kind of partnership between us at Bloomsbury and the WHA. And really what we want to do with this is offer support to early career scholars researching and working in the field of world history by sort of demystifying the publishing process a little bit, offering you some advice on how to write a good proposal, and ultimately providing an opportunity to publish new that everyone understands how the process works and what the steps are if you want to publish a monograph. We'd love your submission by 1st of September, as Carrie says, and the work is the WHA committee will then select a short list of 5 projects, which we at Bloomsbury will send out for external review. We will package up this feedback and send it back to those 5 shortlisted authors, along with our own sort of editorial advice to help you develop your proposal further from that point. The WHA committee and Bloomsbury editorial will then select a winning proposal after you've had an opportunity to kind of make changes and respond to the feedback and editorial advice that we've given you. The winning proposal will be offered a book contract with Bloomsbury, and we're also going to provide up to £500 from Bloomsbury and WHA, which can be used for specialist language editing for any authors who are not native English speakers, or we could also put it towards purchasing images for use in the book, for example. The idea is that for early career researchers starting out on your first book, we want to help you develop your proposal from a really early stage, give you the editorial advice and external feedback, and essentially we hope it will be a sort of collaborative and enjoyable way to start work on your first proposal and get your first book contract. You need to be a member of the WHA when submitting your proposal, but they're going to sponsor up to 10 memberships for those who need assistance. So you can take a look at their website for more information on this. Please also look at the WHA website for info on how to submit your proposal as well. So to start off, I thought I would just give you a very quick overview of the publishing process itself, so you know how it goes. Then I'm going to share with you a sort of example proposal form and talk you through the do's and don'ts of each section. There's sort of some good and bad examples on there for you to see. I can share copies of the example proposal afterwards as well for anyone who wants a copy. And then finally, just a few little tips about what your sort of changes should be from your thesis to your monograph proposal. So to start with, the publishing process itself. So the first stage from our point of view as the publisher is obviously receiving the proposal. And we will consider whether it's something that we are interested in publishing. There's a lot of factors involved in that. The main ones, though, are: would the book contribute something new to the field? Is it a new topic entirely? Is it a new approach or perspective, a new reading of the sources, or perhaps a new argument to supersede those that have come before? Is the proposal and the sample chapter well written, well structured, well argued? Would the project suit our list at Bloomsbury? Has the author got the right audience in mind? We are obviously an academic publisher. We're looking to appeal to the academic community, and that's important to know when you're writing your proposal. And also, does the author understand where it sits in the market? What other existing literature does it kind of build on or challenge? Where is it kind of going to be sitting in your libraries, that kind of thing? So if myself or another editor looks at these factors and thinks, yes, it is a project we'd like to take forward, we respond to that author with ideas and suggestions as to how we might improve or develop their proposal before sending it out for review. Now, this is a section that our prize with WHA is going to really hone in on, because when you're an early career researcher and it's your first proposal, what often happens is proposals are submitted that do need quite a lot of work, and between the WHA committee and ourselves at Bloomsbury, we're going to help you develop your proposal at that early stage to make sure that it's as good as it can be, without you having to go away and kind of work it out on your own. So that's really where this prize comes into initially. When the proposal is kind of ready for review, it goes out, and of course we get usually 2 or 3 sets of review for you to mull over, think about how you might revise your proposal in light of them. And we will also often give you our own recommendations too. Now, again, this is where the prize differs a little bit, because if the feedback we get is, let's say, lukewarm or not particularly positive, often it's a case of, right, off you go away, revise your proposal on your own, resubmit it, we'll see how you get on with it. The idea of the prize is we aren't leaving you to flounder on your own at that point. We're kind of telling you how we should be revising and some resubmitting and helping you do that. If the reviews are positive, or once we get the reviews to be positive, the idea is then we seek the approval of our internal board, the Bloomsbury board, to formally offer the author terms and contract the project. As part of that contract, the author will sort of tell us how much time they need to do those further revisions and prepare their full manuscript. That can be anywhere from a couple of months to a couple of years, depending on the project in question and what the author's up to, and how it ties in with their plans. And we will also provide the author with kind of helpful guides on things like our house style and referencing and how to secure permissions. When we reach that mutually agreed submission deadline, you, the author, will send us your full manuscript, and we will send it out for another round of review to get some more feedback, give you time to make those final additions before it goes into production. So it's a very collaborative process, and the idea is that we give you lots of support. Usually we give you as much support as we can through the peer review process anyway, but with the WHA Diversity Prize, we really kick up that support another level, and we're here to kind of help you create a really strong, solid first proposal between us. So I'll now show you the example proposal that I have put together, and I will talk you through little bits and pieces in there. Can you sort of nod or wave if you can see all this? Yeah, perfect. Okay, so this is our proposal form. And this is what we ask every new author to complete and submit. And sometimes this comes with a sample chapter, sometimes with a whole manuscript, but we absolutely need this proposal form with every new project that we receive. The first couple of sections are quite self-explanatory. We want to know your name, your title, a little bio about your experience to date. So I won't bore you by telling you what to put in there. But if we carry on from there, thinking about information, book title and subtitle. So the thing to really keep in mind when you're thinking about your title is that search engine algorithms and digital libraries really heavily lean upon the words of the main title when a potential reader is searching for a book they're interested in. So the problem with the bad example I have in red here is that if a book just had the word uncovered, that's not going to help a reader looking for a book. So let's say someone was searching, for example, History of Childhood in the British Empire. This book would not appear at the top of that search as it should, but way down the list. And that's because none of the words that they are searching for map onto the title. The algorithm could rely on the subtitle.
Patty?
Or yes, Trevor.
Sorry, Corinna's question was time sensitive. She just asked if it would be all right if she snaps photos of this sample with her camera phone.
That's fine. I also can send out a copy for you all afterwards.
Okay, I just didn't want her to lose it if she wanted it. Okay, thanks.
No problem. That's totally fine. That's what I'm saying. Anyway, so yes, the search engine or algorithm can use a subtitle or chapter headings to kind of bolster the search, but there's a real hierarchy when it comes to what is kind of searchable. So the main title is always the best, and you aren't making the most of your title if you're putting the keywords in the subtitle or the chapter headings and relying on a kind of more, intriguing but not particularly clear title for your readers to find it. The second reason that why I wouldn't recommend Uncovered is that it doesn't actually tell the reader much about the book. Again, you're relying on the subtitle for people to really understand what you're talking about. So, what or who has been uncovered or what about it. And yes, okay, someone might click on that book and then they'd understand from the subtitle what you're talking about. But what we know about search engine and reader behavior is that people will look at the title alone first, and they'll only move on to the subtitle if they think the book is for them. So a lot of people would see Uncovered, think, I haven't got a clue what that means, and then, as we all do in our busy lives, move on. So as I've put here, a good example is Children of the Cape Colony, Emancipation, Labour and Freedom in the British Empire. It tells the reader what the book's about. It's important that it's got all the key words in there, and that's just an example of what we're looking for in a title. Moving on to the next section is the summary. So it's important this is kept short. So this is something we use for marketing purposes. So sorry, Travis, you asked me another question. Oh no, you were just moving your hand. Okay.
No, I was just resting my head on my hand.
Good. So what we want from this summary is that you get right to the heart of what your book does. And we really want it to be sort of specific enough that it sets your book apart. But as you can see from the example that I've put here, the bad example is explores sexual violence in the Pacific. Now, that's not untrue. That probably is what this book does. But there are many existing books that explore sexual violence in the Pacific. So that doesn't really help us. That won't set your book apart. But if you look at the green example, examines the contested creation of colonial criminal justice systems in the British and French Pacific, focusing on the experiences of islanders and indentured labourers in navigating incidents of sexual violence through the criminal courts. Now that really does give us some kind of, meat to get into. It tells us what the book is actually exploring about sexual violence and who in the Pacific and when, and all these different, aspects that will be really helpful. So that's what you want to think about when you're coming up with a summary. You want to be able to fit it into a single sentence. Admittedly, that's a particularly long sentence, but it gets all of the main points, tick, 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 and that's what we're looking for. So moving on to the description. As you can see, this is longer. So this example here is 3 kind of short sections, and this description serves as the basis of what you'll see on the back cover of a book. So that's what you've got to think about when you're writing this description, is remembering where it's going to go. And for this example, it will be on the back cover. So people who are potentially interested in reading your book are going to read this, and we want to keep them intrigued and interested. So it's really important that it goes to the heart of your book, and it talks about your main goals, your main arguments, your main ambitions. You don't want to be evasive, because if people don't understand what you're talking about, they won't want to read your book. They need to know what you're going to be talking about and think, that sounds interesting, or I need that for my research. So that's super important. Also, make sure that you avoid scene setting and get straight to the, the meat of what your book does and says. So what that means is, I don't want you, let's say you're talking about, a book on violence in colonial Africa. You don't want to start with, colonialism in Africa was a centuries-long issue with many different empires involved, and this, that, and we don't want any of that. We want to get straight to the heart of what your book's talking about, and what it's contributing that is new or different. It's also really important that you situate your study both temporally and geographically. You just don't want your readers to come away questioning big things like when, how, or who are we talking about. We want them to be thinking, and I wonder how they'll discuss this, or what their arguments say. That's kind of the questions we want them to be walking away with. The detailed description section on your proposal, this is just an opportunity for you to include more background about your research or the project that the work's coming out of. You may not have had a chance to include everything you wanted in such a short description. So in here, you can go into much more about the wider historiography of the field if you want to, go into more detail about the rationale, the approach, anything that's kind of you think your reviewers or your editors should know. You don't have to write this as marketing copy either. So again, as I said, the description is being written for marketing purposes. This one, you can summarize it in a comprehensive but succinct way without thinking, who am I writing this for? This is just like an information dump if you need more space. So moving back onto what is another marketing section, the key features. So this is something that we will have in our internal systems, which again will be used for marketing purposes, but also feed into the metadata that search engines use. So it's an opportunity for us to include those keywords, but also kind of really succinctly explain why someone would want to read your book. What are the USPs? The key features should be as specific to your book as possible. So like vague and broad features, such as includes archival material, really aren't helpful, because again, that does not set your book apart. Many books include archival material. Instead, think about what your book does differently or what sets it apart. We want to keep those key features as short as possible. So 20 words is really the max, but 10 or 15 is better. And start with verbs if you can. So uncovers, illuminates, reveals, challenges. And if we look at the examples that I've included here, offers new perspectives on British imperial history. The number of books that we can say do that, ridiculous. Explores trials, but how do you explore trials? What are you saying about those trials? So we really want you to get the meat of your book again with these short, pithy key benefits. Going on to your table of contents. So you can choose whether to include subheadings or not. Simple ones are fine, as long as they're descriptive enough and they tell the reader what the chapter's about. Unless there's a real reason to, it's best to avoid single word chapter headings. They can sometimes look quite cool to be like, I don't know, let's say hotel, restaurant, bar, blah, 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 fine, but you don't actually know what you're talking about each of those spaces. So we want them to be descriptive headings. You can also think about including parts if you think they would help with the book structure. They are often more helpful for edited collections to help lend cohesion and strengthen the argument, but you can include them if you think they bring something to your monograph. I would just say be careful not to include them for the sake of it. As you can see, this example here, really clear chapter headings. You can follow the argument throughout. You also understand kind of what the key points are. So this is like a really good example of a table of contents that tells you exactly what you want. And then you move on to chapter synopses. So this is your opportunity to tell us what you're going to talk about in each chapter, but also show us how your argument will follow through and mature as you build it up, as you challenge it, as you sort of add literature to it. We want to know what you're arguing in each chapter, what source or case studies that you're using, how that chapter feeds into the overall project. Please do order them chapter by chapter. We're looking for sort of 250 words for each synopsis, and it's really important that you don't forget a synopsis for your introduction and your conclusion. This happens a lot, and it's very unhelpful because your introduction and your conclusion are super important to where you're building the book up and you're kind of drawing the book together. And if I, as an editor or as a reviewer, doesn't know what you're sort of introducing or concluding, we can't get a feel for your whole book. So really do make sure that you include synopses for both of those. Also do, if there's any sort of really crucial literature, so if you're contributing to some or if you're challenging some, again, mention that in here, those synopses, that's fine. Just anything that's really central to what you're saying and how we want to know about in these synopses. The word count, we are looking for between 70 and 90,000 words. You might find that if you're turning a thesis into a monograph that you need to cut your thesis down. That actually is quite a good exercise. You can streamline your material, make sure that you're only including the aspects of your argument that are relevant and important. I'll go into this a little bit later, but there's also parts of your thesis you can remove. As I said, we'll come back to that in a moment. Submission date. Do have a little think about this and be realistic. If you think, oh, you know, I've got a massive research project for the next 6 months, but it's fine, I'll power through and write it anyway. Don't do that. Give yourself time. Make sure you know when you're going to do it and how. It's fine. It's easy for us to kind of be flexible at the start. It's harder once schedules are set. So we would like you to tell us, you know, be realistic from the start when you think you'll be able to submit, and that really helps everything. Funding and open access, you can ignore this if it's not relevant to you. But if you do have any open access opportunities, it is something that's really good. You know, if your book is open access, that means that anyone can read and download it for free. It really helps with citations and kind of number of readers. So there are some sort of countries, for example, that have countrywide funds like Austria. So if you're based in Austria, you can apply for those. And also maybe speak to your institution. Some have open access dedicated funds, just something to think about. But as I said, not to worry if you don't have any of this, you can just leave this section blank. Additional information. So this is just sort of very practical stuff. Do you have any images that you want to include? Color printing is sadly very expensive, so we'll have to print everything as black and white. And do keep this in mind when you are choosing your images. If there's an image which you think this is super integral to everything that I'm saying and arguing, but it must be in color, that is potentially an issue. And the same goes for permissions. If there's something that you think, I need this in here because otherwise what I'm saying does not make sense, that's fine, but you need to make sure really early on that you can get permissions to include it, because if you can't, that's a sticking point. We can offer you lots of help when it comes to seeking permissions about how to do it and where. We've got ready-made forms for you, so we can help you with all that, but do think about it early on. Finally, we'll identify 5 publications which are situated in the field of research of your book. Here, I would just like 5 bullet points of, you know, recent or kind of important books that you would sort of go to in your field. It just helps us to understand where your book sits in the market. Sample material. So if you have a sample chapter, that's very helpful, especially for PhD theses to monograph projects. I would recommend you providing us with some sample material, just so we can get a sense of your writing style and also give you some advice, if you need it, about how to adapt it for a monograph project rather than a thesis. The introduction is often the most helpful, because in there you are obviously giving us an overview of your whole book. So if you have the intro, that's exactly what I would like. Now we move on to information about the competition and the market. So again, I've included here in green a very helpful example of a real book of mine that I published, and in it, it sort of just explains, it lists, you know, a number of publications in the field, explains how their book challenges, builds on, or supports this work. We want to know how your research will benefit or contribute to the field and what that field currently looks like. So, you know, we just want to know, why would someone want to read your book, and what does it do and say? And that's what this section tells us at length. And then in a similar sort of vein, market and readership, thinking about who the main readership of the book's going to be. I already mentioned earlier, but I'll say it again, you know, academic monographs will be written primarily for scholars, researchers and postgrads working, researching and studying in the same or related fields. With history, it can be difficult sometimes because it's one of those topics that a lot of people have a general interest in, but the level at which you are writing and the way in which you write PhD theses, monographs, they are going to be appealing mainly to academics and scholars. So again, I've included here an example of what an author of mine wrote here, and it's really great because she explains which types of history, which areas, which fields would be interested in this. And she also has gone into kind of, you know, crossover fields, so criminology, legal anthropology and social legal studies. That was all very helpful for us, especially because we can then go to our marketing colleagues and say, hey, look, you might want to cross-reference, cross-market this particular title. Secondary market and readership. So as I said, the monograph is going to be mainly for specialist audiences described above, but perhaps it will also be useful for undergrad readers, usually those more advanced undergrads. And it might be that your book will be used in seminars for teaching, that kind of thing. If that's the case, you know, tell me which modules what it would cover. Tell me what sort of courses names it would be for. And then finally, a little bit about the institutions that are strongest in these kind of fields, where they are, and also any organizations or conferences that are relevant. This is, again, super helpful for our marketing team because they will see this and say, right, okay, well, we know to put this book on the list for the African Studies Association, you know, all of these different journals and different conferences that will be useful down the line. So that is a very kind of whirlwind tour around the proposal form. As I said, I will make that available afterwards for anyone who wants a copy, so you haven't got to rely on your you know, pictures of it or what have you. So I'll send that to Kerry and Trev afterwards, and they can then circulate it to the rest of you. And then finally, as I promised, the last section of this workshop, I'm just going to give you a few kind of like bullet points of things that we often see when a book project was once a thesis and is still clearly a thesis rather than a monograph, just to help you understand what we're looking for, how we want you to adapt your theses into a book project. And I think the main thing to start with is that you've got to remember that your PhD and your monograph should be and are very different things. The audience of your PhD was your dissertation committee and your supervisors. They are super well versed in the subject area, and they're looking for you to kind of prove, yes, I've done my reading and I have the knowledge of this subject area in order to prove and in order to pass an exam. But now you're, you know, you've got your PhD, and you're looking to become the author of the book, you're recognized as an expert. So it's not so much you proving, look how much reading I've done. It's really more about you saying, this is why my book matters. This is what it's saying. This is the argument I'm making. Your book's going to be marketed to a much larger audience of researchers and students from various disciplines. And so that also means that how you write matters as much as what you're going to say. You want to try and make your writing and style more accessible, and your voice needs to be more authoritative. It's really easy to fall into the trap of, I will seek to, or this is how, I think this proves, or I'd like to think this, give you the idea of, but we don't want that. We want you to be very sure about what you're saying and, tell us, this is the argument, this is why, this backs it up, and this shows you how. We need you to be more authoritative in that way. So a few key things to look out for. I promised earlier that I would come back to structure, and that's what I'm doing now. There are sections of your theses that we don't want to see in your monograph, and they, the thing we most don't want to see are separate sections that are headed methodology or secondary literature or source review. We don't want anything that's kind of as obvious as that. Now, if it's really important how, that you kind of review your sources because that is integral to your argument, then of course you should still do that, but it should be wrapped up in your prose, in your discussion, and woven into your argument, and only if it's relevant. If it's not actually as relevant to your argument, then you don't need to do that. You also don't prove that you've read widely in the field for a monograph, so you don't need a secondary literature section in which you effectively list, I read this and they told me that, and I read this and they told me that, and so on and so forth. You just want to refer to the literature that is relevant, and you are kind of building on or challenging in your own discussion. The other thing to be careful of, as we've kind of touched on this already, but subheadings need to be simple, no more than 2 levels, and they need to have titles that are engaging, clear, and related to your argument. So many theses have numbered subheadings. We definitely don't want that. And we definitely don't want headings like research questions or case study 2 or theory or Africa, which are not very informative, doesn't really tell the reader what they're about. Either remove or reduce those headings, or try and use headings that are more instructive and interesting, offering clues about the arguments that you're making, or the structure of the book, the way that your argument is being followed through. Moving on to writing style, I've already spoken about the need to be more authoritative and not kind of tiptoe around what you think this might be or might say. But there's a few other things that often come up. Do not refer to your work as a thesis, dissertation, PhD, or paper. Please make sure you've removed all those references. And if you must describe the work, it's a chapter or it's a book. It's also important that you remove instances of the first person. This is something that you get a lot in theses, and you don't really want it in monographs unless there's a really good reason for it. Ethnography, for example, is one exception, but generally first person is not encouraged. Make sure that you remove any really repetitive signposting or anything that's really obvious phrasing. So, as I've just proved, or as I will go on to demonstrate, it's not really necessary for a book, and actually it can be quite distracting or even interrupt your argument. You really want to sort of more naturally fold these things that you've proven or demonstrated into your argument or your discussion, rather than stating, I've proven this with this, I've shown this with this. It's really important that in the same way that you avoid over-explaining the book or providing a running commentary. So you do want some statements that kind of help direct your reader through your book, but you don't want to have statements again and again and again that say, you know, and this chapter is going to talk about this chapter is split into 5 parts, then I'm going to show this, then I'm going to do that. You kind of want a little bit in there, but not so much that it kind of interrupts the flow of your text. Please do remove any massive footnotes and any massive paragraphs. Sometimes you get paragraphs which are whole pages long, and we don't want that. Please make sure that you interrupt them somewhere. And as I said earlier, you might choose to remove materials, case studies, or lengthy discussions in your book project from your PhD, because that material was perhaps more demonstrating a point that you had done your reading or knew your stuff, rather than was actually contributing to your argument. So again, taking out anything that doesn't really feed into it will really help. So those are all the main points I had. If anyone has any questions or specific points that I haven't mentioned, do let me know.
Any questions from folks? You can also put them in the chat if you don't want to speak them out loud. Just really quickly, can you remind me of the date for this year's cutoff?
Yes, so we would like proposal submissions by the on the 1st of September, please. And you can go to WHA website for instructions on how to do this. And I will send Kerry not only the example proposal that I talked you through, but also a blank copy of that proposal form, which is what you'd need to submit a proposal to this prize.
Thanks. So I hope we see a lot of proposals from folks. This is a really great opportunity. And I want to thank you on behalf of the WHA again, Maddie, for making this opportunity possible.
No, it's been great. And obviously means I can come to the conference every year, so that's a nice bonus.
That's right. Well, people may not think that Pittsburgh is as sexy as Bilbao, but next year's conference is also going to be fantastic. I happen to love Pittsburgh. It's an amazing city.
It seems like everywhere I've been hearing people say fabulous things about Pittsburgh. So I think that'll be shared on our website soon.
Great. Cool. Okay. If there are no questions, then I'll leave it there. Oh. Yes, I think that's fine, Ernest. You know, you'll need to change it regardless of when you defend your dissertation. So that's totally fine. If there are any questions, you can email me directly, or Barry, or you know, Trevor. And as I said, Kerry will send round the example proposal and the blank proposal form in the next 24 hours. And I think that's everything. So thanks for joining, and have a good morning, afternoon, evening, depending on where you are.
Yep. Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much, Maddie, again.
Excellent.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.